I had always believed that a year apart wouldn't matter. Trust, after all, was the foundation of any marriage, and Lily and I had built ours over years of love, laughter, and shared dreams. When my deployment overseas as a marine biologist came up, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work on an environmental conservation project, I was reluctant. But Lily, ever supportive, had reassured me. Go, she'd said, her bright smile a beacon in the dim light of our small kitchen. We'll make it through this. I'll be right here waiting when you come back. Her words had been steady, her resolve firm. So I left, carrying with me her promise and a heart full of faith. The first few months of my voyage were tough. The isolation was more profound than I had anticipated, even with periodic calls and video messages from Lily. She filled me in on her life back home, her advanced accounting course at the university, weekend meetups with friends, and her excitement about an upcoming yoga retreat. It felt normal, albeit distant. But then, in the fourth month, I received an email. Its subject line read, "Wonderful news." My pulse quickened as I clicked it open. "Robert," it began, "I've been keeping a little secret, but I can't wait any longer. I'm pregnant. I'm 3 months along. Isn't it incredible? Our baby is coming in 6 months. I've already started thinking about names." My heart should have been soaring. Instead, a peculiar weight settled in my chest. 3 months. I quickly did the math in my head. If she was 3 months pregnant now, then the conception would have happened in my second month away, when I hadn't set foot on American soil since I departed. At first, I chalked it up to stress muddling my judgment. Surely, Lily couldn't. I reread the email, focusing on her excitement, her hope. But my scientific mind couldn't shake the timeline discrepancy. It hung in my thoughts like an anchor, dragging me into darker waters. I replied with cautious enthusiasm. "That's incredible news, Lily. I'm so happy. Tell me more, how have you been feeling? When did you find out?" I hoped she'd offer details that might soothe my unease. Her response came the next day, filled with anecdotes about morning sickness, visits to the doctor, and her cravings for peanut butter and pickles. She mentioned how supportive her classmates had been, particularly Ethan, her study partner from her accounting course. "He's been such a sweetheart," she wrote. "Helping me carry my books and making me laugh when I felt low." I stared at the name, Ethan. It hadn't meant anything before. Now, it itched at my brain like a splinter. I tried to dismiss it, reasoning that my worries were irrational, that Lily was simply sharing her day-to-day life. But doubts are insidious. They creep, twist, and refuse to let go. By the time her next video call came, I had memorized her email, dissecting each line for answers that weren't there. By the time Lily called me on video, I was ready, or so I thought. Her face lit up the screen, the warm, familiar smile tugging at my heart. But as much as I wanted to dive into the comfort of her laughter and our usual banter, the questions buzzing in my head refused to quiet down. "Hey, honey," she greeted, her voice bubbly. "You look good. The ocean air must be doing wonders for you." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been busy, but I'm holding up. How about you? You're glowing." She beamed, resting a hand on her belly, a move that struck me as practiced, almost theatrical. "Oh, Robert, you have no idea. I mean, it hasn't been all sunshine and roses. The morning sickness was brutal. But now that I'm in the second trimester, I feel amazing." "Second trimester," I echoed. The words felt heavy, wrong. Lily tilted her head. "You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just processing. You know, thinking about the timing." Her expression tightened for a split second before she covered it with a bright laugh. "Oh, don't stress yourself trying to figure out dates. I was all over the place too, trying to count back and figure out when it happened." I nodded, my mind racing. "So, when did the doctor say the baby's due?" She hesitated, fiddling with a strand of her hair. "Late January." I did the math again, silently. That would place the conception, in May. 2 months after I'd left. "Robert?" Her voice snapped me back. "You're being quiet." "Just taking it all in," I said, pasting on another smile. "It's a lot, you know. A baby, it's huge." She laughed. "Huge doesn't even cover it. I've already started planning the nursery. Oh, and you'll never guess who's been a lifesaver, Ethan. He even offered to help me paint. Isn't that sweet?" There was that name again, Ethan. It rubbed me the wrong way, even if I couldn't put my finger on why. My chest felt tight as I forced out, sounds like he's been around a lot. Oh, just as a friend, she said quickly. Don't be silly. He's like, a younger brother, really. Her answer should have reassured me. Instead, it stirred a fresh wave of unease. Something in her tone felt off, like a key striking the wrong note. I let it go, for now. The weeks that followed were agonizing. I threw myself into work, trying to keep busy. But every night, when the world went quiet, I found myself revisiting that conversation. My gut told me something was wrong. I just couldn't prove it. Then, I made a decision. If the timing didn't add up, I needed answers. Real answers. I reached out to an old friend, Josh, who had gone into private investigations after leaving the Navy. He owed me a favor from way back, and I cashed it in. You want me to check up on your wife, he said when I explained. I need to know if there's someone else, I admitted, hating how the word sounded. Just, subtle stuff. No dramatic stakeouts. Josh was quiet for a moment. You sure about this, Rob? Once you open this door, you can't close it. I'm sure, I said firmly. I need the truth. 2 weeks later, Josh called. We need to talk. I was in the middle of cataloging specimens, but his tone made me set everything down. What did you find? Not over the phone, he said. Check your email. And brace yourself. I hung up and logged into my account. Josh had sent a single file, a series of photos and a brief report. My stomach turned as I opened it. The photos were of Lily. In one, she was walking arm in arm with Ethan into a cafe. In another, he was leaning against her car, smiling, as she handed him something. But it was the last one that gutted me, a shot of them outside her apartment. Ethan had his hand on her belly, and she was smiling up at him like he was the center of her world. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some innocent reason for those moments. But deep down, I knew. When I called Lily later that night, my voice was cold, distant. She noticed immediately. Are you mad at me? She asked. No, I said flatly. Just tired. She hesitated. Robert, if something's wrong, you can tell me. For a split second, I wanted to. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers. But I held back. Not yet. Everything's fine, I lied. I'll call you tomorrow. I ended the call and sat in the dim light of my cabin, staring at nothing. My heart felt like it had been torn in two, one half still clinging to the hope that Lily was the woman I thought she was, the other sinking under the weight of betrayal. The flight home was long, too long. I had spent the last hour of it staring at the seatback in front of me, gripping the armrests until my knuckles went white. The storm inside me was too loud to ignore now. Every mile closer to home felt like a step toward the edge of a cliff I couldn't stop myself from walking off. When the plane touched down, I barely registered the announcements or the bustle of passengers gathering their belongings. My mind was laser-focused on one thing, Lily. I needed to see her, face her, and finally demand the answers I'd been avoiding for months. The ride from the airport felt surreal. The streets of our quiet neighborhood, with its tree-lined sidewalks and modest homes, seemed unchanged. But I had changed. I was carrying the weight of what I'd seen, what I knew. And I wasn't sure if I could carry it much longer. I stepped out of the cab, my suitcase in hand, and stared up at the apartment building. Our building. My stomach churned with a mix of dread and determination. I wasn't coming home to the life I had left behind. That life was gone. Burned to ashes. As I climbed the stairs, I heard the faint sound of a baby crying. My heart seized. It wasn't unfamiliar anymore. Over the last few weeks, Lily had sent me videos and audio clips of our baby. Hearing his cries in person, though, made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. I reached the door and hesitated. My keys felt heavier than usual as I slid them into the lock. My hand trembled slightly, and I cursed myself for the weakness. Taking a deep breath, I turned the key and pushed the door open. Lily was there, standing in the middle of the living room, rocking the baby in her arms. The sight of her should have been a balm to my soul, her long auburn hair tied back, her soft features lit with the glow of new motherhood. Instead, it ignited every ounce of anger I had tried to keep buried. Robert, she exclaimed, her face breaking into a radiant smile. You're home. Oh, God, I missed you so much. She moved toward me, but I took a step back. The gesture was enough to freeze her in her tracks. Her smile faltered as her eyes searched mine. What's wrong? She asked, her voice softening. You're home now. We're together. Isn't that what you wanted? I dropped my suitcase with a thud. I want you to pack your things, I said coldly. Her mouth fell open. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the lies, Lily, I snapped. The lies you've been feeding me for months. Her arms tightened around the baby protectively, and she took a step back. Robert, you're tired. You've been traveling for so long. Let's sit down and talk. No. I roared, my voice echoing off the walls. We're not sitting down. We're not talking. I've had enough of your talking. The baby wailed, but I barely heard it over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Lily looked at me, her eyes wide and filled with tears, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Robert, please, she begged. You're scaring him. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Pack your things, I repeated, my voice low and trembling with controlled fury. You and him. Both of you. Get out. Robert, I don't understand, she cried. What's gotten into you? You don't understand. I said, laughing bitterly. Should I spell it out for you, Lily? Should I explain how the math doesn't add up? How a baby conceived 2 months after I left can't possibly be mine. Her face went pale. Robert. Don't Robert me. I interrupted. I know, Lily. I know about you. I know about Ethan. The name hung in the air like a grenade waiting to explode. Lily's lips trembled as she clutched the baby closer to her chest. Please, she whispered. Let's just sit and talk. I can explain. Explain. I barked. Explain what? How you've been sneaking around with your classmate. How you tried to pass off his kid as mine. How you've been lying to my face every single day. Go ahead, Lily. Explain that to me. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. Not anymore. It's not what you think, she said, her voice breaking. Ethan, he was just a friend. It didn't mean anything. Don't lie to me. I shouted. Don't you dare stand there and lie to me. The baby's cries grew louder, and Lily's tears fell faster. She was shaking now, and for a brief moment, I thought she might collapse. I was lonely, she finally said, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake, Robert. Please. A mistake. I repeated, my voice dripping with venom. A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. A mistake is burning dinner. What you did was deliberate. You made a choice. Lily sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The baby quieted for a moment, staring at me with wide, innocent eyes. It was a cruel irony, this child, so blameless, was at the center of the storm tearing my life apart. I turned away, unable to look at them any longer. You've got until tomorrow, I said. Be gone by then. Robert, please, she cried. Don't do this. We can fix this. We can still be a family. I looked at her one last time, my chest tightening with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. There is no family, Lily. Not anymore. I grabbed my suitcase and walked out the door, slamming it shut behind me. As I stood in the hallway, the muffled sound of her sobs echoed through the walls. I leaned against the door, my head in my hands, and let the weight of everything crash down on me. When I walked out that door, I thought I was leaving everything behind, the lies, the betrayal, the image of Lily clutching that child who wasn't mine. But as I stood in the cold hallway, staring at nothing, I realized the truth: you can't just walk away from something that deep. It clings to you, like oil on your skin, no matter how hard you try to scrub it off. I found myself pacing the block around our apartment, my mind spinning. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I already knew who it was. Lily. She was calling again. I let it ring, watching the screen light up until it faded into silence. The night was brisk, the chill biting at my skin, but I barely noticed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, tear-streaked, pleading, and I hated that it still tugged at me. Part of me wanted to turn back, to give her one more chance to explain. But I couldn't shake the image of that man, Ethan, and all the proof that Josh had sent me. No amount of tears could erase what I'd seen. After what felt like hours, I ended up in a late-night diner a few blocks away. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, where the waitstaff barely looked at you unless you called them over. Perfect. I slid into a booth near the window and stared at the empty coffee cup in front of me. The waitress came over, her pen poised. "What'll it be?" "Just coffee," I muttered. "Black." She nodded and left without another word. The coffee came a few minutes later, steaming and bitter. I drank it anyway, needing something to ground me. That's when my phone buzzed again. Another call from Lily. I almost ignored it, but something in me snapped. I hit answer and pressed the phone to my ear. "What?" I said, my voice flat. "Robert," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, just come back so we can talk. I'm begging you. Don't do this." "There's nothing left to talk about," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I told you to leave. That's it." "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "It wasn't what you think. Ethan, he's nothing. It didn't mean anything." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. "He's the father of your child, Lily. How the hell does that not mean anything?" There was a long silence on the other end, filled only by her shaky breathing. Finally, she said, "I didn't want this. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I made a mistake, Robert. A horrible mistake. But I love you. Please, let's fix this." Her words felt like knives in my chest. "Fix this?" I said, my voice rising. "You think we can just slap a band-aid on this and move on? You lied to me, Lily. You betrayed me. You were going to pass off another man's child as mine." "I didn't know what else to do," she cried. "I was scared. You were gone for so long, and I—" "You what?" I interrupted. "Got lonely. That's your excuse. I was out there, working my ass off, trusting you, and you couldn't even keep it together for a year." She sobbed on the other end of the line, but I didn't care. I was too angry, too broken. "Don't call me again," I said coldly. "You've got until tomorrow to leave, or I'll throw your things out myself." I hung up and tossed the phone onto the table, leaning back against the booth. My chest felt tight, my head pounding with the weight of everything. The waitress came by, but I waved her off, unable to stomach the thought of eating. The next morning, I returned to the apartment. I expected to find it empty, but when I opened the door, Lily was still there. The baby was sleeping in his bassinet, and Lily was sitting on the couch, a suitcase at her feet. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair disheveled. "I'm leaving," she said quietly, not looking at me. "But I wanted to say goodbye." I didn't reply, my jaw clenched as I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. The air was thick with tension, every word feeling like a potential spark to a powder keg. "I know you hate me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't blame you. But I love you, Robert. I always have." I laughed bitterly. "You have a funny way of showing it." She flinched, but I didn't care. I couldn't afford to care anymore. "Where will you go?" I asked after a long silence. "My parents' house," she said, her hands twisting in her lap. "They'll help me until I figure things out." "Good," I said shortly. "Take your things and go. I don't want to see you again." She nodded, tears streaming down her face as she stood and picked up the suitcase. She paused by the bassinet, her hands hovering over the baby. I want you to know that he's innocent in all this. He didn't ask for any of it." I looked at the baby, sleeping peacefully, and for a moment, my anger faltered. She was right. The child hadn't done anything wrong. But it didn't change the fact that he wasn't mine. "I'm sorry, Robert," she said, her voice breaking. "For everything." Without another word, she picked up the baby and walked out the door. When it closed behind her, the apartment fell into a silence so deep it was almost deafening. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she'd been. The weight of it all finally hit me, and I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. I thought I'd feel relief when she left. Instead, all I felt was the ache of what I'd lost, and the haunting question of whether I'd ever be able to trust again. The days after Lily left were a blur. I told myself I'd feel relief, maybe even freedom, but all I felt was a gaping void. The silence in the apartment was suffocating, each empty room a reminder of what had once been and the lies that had destroyed it. I went about my life like a machine, wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. My co-workers didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer explanations. I buried myself in projects, trying to drown out the memories of Lily's pleading eyes and the cries of the baby that wasn't mine. Then one evening, as I sorted through the stack of mail on my kitchen counter, I found a plain white envelope with no return address. My gut told me it was from Lily before I even opened it. Inside was a single handwritten note and a small photograph. Robert. I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to. I lied to you, and I can never take that back. But I want you to know that I loved you, still do, in a way I can't explain. Ethan and I, it was never supposed to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, but I made choices that I can't undo. I thought I could fix it, thought that maybe if you believed the baby was yours, we could hold on to what we had. But the truth has a way of catching up with you. This is goodbye, Robert. I'm leaving the city for good. I think it's the only way I can give you the space to heal, and maybe it's the only way I can heal too. Take care of yourself. You deserve better than I could give you. Lily. P.S. The photo is of him. I thought you might want to see him one last time. My hands shook as I pulled out the photograph. The baby was staring straight at the camera, his chubby face framed by wisps of dark hair. There was a faint resemblance to Lily in his eyes, but nothing of me. Nothing at all. I clenched the note and photo in my fist, a surge of anger bubbling up. I wanted to rip them apart, throw them away, erase them from existence. But instead, I set them down on the counter and walked away. Some things were too heavy to carry, even for a man who had spent months at sea hauling nets and dragging equipment. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the pain began to dull. I moved out of the apartment, unable to stand the ghosts that haunted every corner. I found a smaller place closer to work, a fresh start in every sense of the word. Josh, my old Navy buddy, called me one day to check in. You ever hear from her? He asked, his voice cautious. No, I replied. And I don't expect to. You think she'll come back? I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. No. Lily's gone. And so is that part of my life. One night, months later, I found myself walking by the park where Lily and I used to spend lazy Sunday afternoons. The air was cool, the faint hum of crickets filling the silence. I sat on a bench, staring out at the darkened playground. For the first time, I let myself think about what might have been. If Lily hadn't cheated, if the baby had been mine, if I hadn't spent that year away, would we still be happy? Or were we always destined to fall apart? As the thoughts swirled, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. Lily's betrayal had broken me, yes, but it had also forced me to see something I hadn't wanted to admit. Our marriage wasn't as perfect as I'd thought. The cracks had been there long before Ethan, long before the baby. We just hadn't noticed, or maybe we hadn't wanted to. I stood up, taking a deep breath. The past was behind me now. There was no going back, no fixing what had been broken. But maybe, just maybe, there was a future waiting for me, one where I could rebuild, piece by piece. As I walked away from the park, I felt lighter, as though the weight I'd been carrying for months had finally started to lift. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. This is how it ends, not with a dramatic reunion or a perfect resolution, but with the quiet understanding that some things can't be mended, and that's okay. Life goes on, and so would I.